Hello and welcome to this episode of Business Africa with me, Ruth Lago. Here are the headlines. More than a year after celebrating the end of the CFA Franc, where are we with the echo? Some say the creation of this currency for all ECOWAS states was purely political, used to silence those who called for the end of one of the last remnants of the French colonial era. Our guest, Ivorian economist CFA Franc, founder and director of Pulsar Partners, will answer our questions. And then from the Libyan dinar to the Tunisian or even Moroccan currencies and the Malagasy area to Zambia's and Malawi's kawasha, which one do experts say is the strongest currency in Africa? We'll discuss in this episode of Business Africa. Finally, we look at Johannesburg, where our correspondent Karabo Letala met bar managers who are suffering huge losses due to South Africa's ban on alcohol sales to reduce the spread of COVID-19.
Bienvenue une fois de plus.
In May 2020, a bill was adopted to change the CFA Franc to the echo and end the centralisation of foreign exchange reserves of the West African states with the French Treasury. But since the agreement was reached between the French government and 8 countries in West Africa, no official plan has come to fruition to this day. We find out why in this report.
The French government officially approved the end of the CFA Franc in West Africa in December 2019. The latter was to adopt the eco currency, but several months on, no trace of eco. The West African Monetary Union has little or no desire to relaunch talks on the currency. Lou Vialet is author of the end of the CFA Franc.
La différence entre l'éco et le franc CFA.
The difference between the ECO and the CFA is that France will guarantee on these personal and public funds the stability and euro counter-convertibility of the ECO. But without any counterpart, and this counterpart was a guarantee of responsibility and credibility for the countries of the West African Franc zone. It was a safeguard. That is to say that these counterparts allowed good management and allowed the countries of the Franc zone to make reforms, to use this asset that is a CFA Franc. A very stable currency such as that, there is none on the African continent, and that allowed it to use their currencies to diversify and transform their economies to forge common markets.
So, is the CFA Franc an asset or a monetary servitude? The debate continues to fuel tensions between Africa and France.
Mr. Youssef Karius, thank you for joining us. I remind viewers that you're the founder and director of Pulsar Partners. Do you welcome the announcement to end the French CFA Franc, and will the ECO bring monetary and economic sovereignty that West African countries are waiting for?
Behind the echo, in reality, hides only the terms of 2 reforms, and 2 reforms which are more symbolic in reality than anything else. The first being the repatriation of what is called the foreign exchange reserves of our regional central bank, which was at the time before the echo hosted within the French public accounts. And we'll come back to the fact that the French public treasury are not the Banque de France and the former central French bank. The second reform, that is, in reality, is behind the echo, is only the fact that after the echo, there will be no more French people who will sit on the governing bodies of the Central Bank of West African states. In particular, the West African Central Bank. The fixed parity between the French CFA Franc and the ECO is in reality only a monetary agreement between France and the countries of the West African Monetary Zone, which absolutely does not commit to the European Central Bank. So the only advice that guarantees the stability of the French CFA and its convertibility into euros is a budgetary device, which in itself makes it an extremely fragile tool. It is a whole part of our monetary policy, which in reality is backed by a budgetary device.
So, Mr. Karius, would you say that we should keep the CFA franc, despite the fact that several voices on the continent and elsewhere are rising to demand an end to this currency, which constitutes for some as one of the remnants of France-Afrique?
I think the CFA franc should no longer exist in reality in our time. If it still exists, it is because our decision makers were perhaps a little too lax. Having said that, there's indeed a lot of popular criticism. It's true, but you still have to be rational and keep a certain coolness when you actually analyze the CFA mechanisms, which I think will be almost the same as the ECO mechanism. In any case, in its intrinsic substance, there are advantages. There are also downsides. It must be recognized through the criticism. The franc retains a certain stability, and we'll say the main advantage of the currency, and which gives rise to the other small advantages, including, for example, the fact of having one of the trade terms which remains relatively stable across all of our countries. There are a few exemptions. Ivory Coast is one of them. Now, the main drawback for me is we have talked about sovereignty. So the first is monetary sovereignty. We have no monetary sovereignty, and by signing the monetary agreement between France and the WIMU countries, we voluntarily decided for ourselves, in reality, to deprive ourselves of a monetary policy tool. Monetary policy tools are what we use in the event of a crisis, for example, to cushion part of the crisis.
Many welcome the arrival of the ECO. So why, in your opinion, did ECOWAS not succeed in implementing this currency?
From my point of view, it is because there are really two monetary systems in the pipeline. There's the ECO-WIMU system, which is actually a small reform of the CFA and the ECO, whose convergence plan has been postponed to 2022. But which in reality heralds a monetary system that will be completely different. In my opinion, as to what the ECO is today, adopted by France and the WIMU countries.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef Karius, for answering our questions on Africa News.
It's my pleasure.
Having a strong currency means it's cheaper to import goods, and more trade is taking place than ever before. And when a country's exchange medium is strong, it reduces volatility in the forex market. So what are the currencies that trade at high rates? Stay tuned for the answer.
African currencies have evolved from barter system to hard and liquid cash. Despite the relative weakness of these currencies internationally, some of them are no longer subject to fluctuations in the supply and demand of raw materials. The Libyan dinar has always been the strongest currency in Africa. It has gained strength in recent years thanks to the strict monetary policies implemented by the country's central bank. The bank allows only a limited number of dollars to Moroccan market. Morocco has one of the strongest currencies in Africa, with $1 currently exchanged for about 9.9 Moroccan dirhams. Tunisia used the French francs until 1960, when it was replaced by the dinar, the policy which makes it illegal to export or import dinar or to convert them into other currencies has, among other factors, made dinar one of the highest valued currency in Africa. In Ghana, government spending programs and employment growth have kept the currency strong in Africa, as it is in the case with Botswana Pula. Low-performing currencies include the Congolese franc, which trades at 2,000 to the dollar, and the Sierra Leonean franc.
To South Africa, where our correspondent Karabo Letlatla joins us. He's looked into how small and large companies are being affected by the ban on alcohol sales in the country of more than 57 million inhabitants.
AB InBev, the global brewer, is taking the South African government to court over its third alcohol retail ban. But while the global giant is refusing to speak, it is the smaller players who are willing to tell us about their hardships over the lockdown.
The first lockdown, we were in a position where we had no income coming in at all, but we still had to be responsible for paying our overheads. We still had to look after the staff.
This is Gilroy Breweries. It is a micro brewer that's been around for the last 12 years. Ordinarily, this would be a lively sport packed to the brim. But as we stand, it is barely making any income. But Gilroy was among the lucky ones. he found an angel investor in Mr. Grayling, a young man who was also awed by the atmosphere of the place that he put his own money in.
We have a lot of beer standing, waiting to be used, that we cannot sell. We've got to hope that it opens up soon, so that we don't lose hundreds of thousands of rands worth of beer.
It is not just the microbrewers feeling the pinch. Retailers of alcohol like City's Tavern in Alexandra Township, just outside Sandton, is also feeling the pinch and losing patience with the government's measures. South Africa has virtually banned all alcohol sales as it races to stop the out-of-control coronavirus infections.
It's heavy on us because we're not finding any support from the government. However, the alcohol itself, the alcohol business itself generates a lot of income into the GDP.
For now, Nsako and other alcohol industry players have their money trapped in a product they cannot sell, as pressure piles on the government to save lives while protecting livelihoods.
That's it for this episode of Business Africa. Stay with us on Africanews or visit us online at www.africanews.com in French and English. I'm Ruth Lago. See you soon.